Here in part 2, we're going to discuss which house this is falling in for each of you according to your sidereal rising sign and what the themes of that house are. So if you're not as familiar with the house systems, you may want to make notes as we go through this. If you know this stuff like the back of your hand, this is the perfect time to take a break, go grab a beverage or a snack or something before we reconvene for part 3, where we talk about the Gemini archetype and Gemini themes. So if you have Aries rising by the sidereal zodiac, this is a 3rd house full moon for you. So that has to do with communication, writing, teaching, and learning. It has to do with travel and transportation, especially over short distances. And by short distances, I would say anything within 500 miles of where you live could be considered short distance. Childhood education also falls under the 3rd house. Siblings and extended family, so aunts and uncles, cousins, those sorts of relatives fall under the 3rd house. Your neighbors fall under the 3rd house, as does your immediate environment. So your neighborhood, your community, where you live or where you find yourself, that's all 3rd house as well. Okay. For Taurus rising, this is going to be a 2nd house full moon for you. So that has to do with wealth and possessions. It has to do with movable assets. It has to do with the money that you earn from the work that you do, your sense of self-worth, your values, your priorities, what's important to you. Also, did I mention expenses? Yes, it has to do with expenses. For Gemini, this is a 1st house full moon. So Gemini, with it being the 1st house, that has a lot to do with personality, identity, self-expression. Has a lot to do with the way you look, your physical body, your appearance, your behavior, your mannerisms, the role that you take on in the world, the role that you play in the world. For Cancer, it's a 12th house full moon. So that is more what happens behind our awareness, right? What we're not really aware of because our conscious awareness is not fully seeing it, right? It's not in front view the way 1st house business is. So the 12th house really has to do with privacy, has to do with seclusion, spirituality, and the unconscious mind, especially our unconscious beliefs and our unconscious patterns and habits and programming. And I love full moons in the 12th house because they can be a wonderful time for letting go of unconscious programming and unconscious beliefs. The 12th house also has to do with highly personal or private projects which you might work on independently, like solo projects, or which you might work on behind closed doors, kind of out of the public eye. And then the 12th house also has to do with spiritual practices or spiritual journey, growth and development, and institutions of seclusion, as well as rest and retreat, escape and escapism, delusions, drugs, that sort of thing. That's all 12th house. For Leo rising, this is an 11th house full moon for you. So for Leo rising, 11th house has to do with friends. It has to do with organizations, but it also has to do with hopes and dreams. It can also have to do with income from businesses that you own. But I especially like the hopes and dreams theme of the 11th house, especially when we're working with the lunations, with the new and the full moon, and especially at eclipse time. Because they represent really powerful opportunities to manifest things that are very, very dear to your heart, dreams that you just cherish and hold very close. And so when we have a full moon in that house, it's a wonderful opportunity to bring a long-held hope or dream of yours to fruition. And so if you have something like that you've been working on, or that's been in progress in your life that's never been finished, this can be a fantastic time to finish it up. And like Balaji is doing, giving birth to it into the world, right? For Virgo rising, it's going to be a 10th house full moon. So that has to do with career, it has to do with your professional life, has to do with recognition and achievement and awards, status and reputation, fame. It's your public life, right? Not the 4th house. That's your home life. For Libra, this is a 9th house full moon. So that has to do with higher education. It has to do with long distance travel, long distance transportation, long distance communication. And so especially foreign travel, but even in a large country, you don't even have to leave the country for it to be 9th house related travel or communication. In communication, this can really be themes of broadcasting. It can be themes of publishing. Anything that gets your content, your material, your work to a broad audience, or like mass media, large groups of people, or people far away. That would be ninth house, publishing, broadcasting. Ninth house also has to do with religion, has to do with philosophy, has to do with law. So it can bring up legal issues. It can bring legal issues to a head for some folks, especially at eclipse time. For Scorpio, this is an 8th house full moon. So 8th house is a financial house, right? It's other people's resources that are at your disposal. Things like inheritance, taxes, insurance, investment earnings, bonus and commission income is also 8th house income. Balaji says, I'm traveling next week. Should I be careful? I would say yes, just in light of the fact that there's so many powerful conjunctions going on, and the eclipse is in the signs that govern transportation, and because Mercury does play such a strong role in your chart. That's not to say necessarily that something bad could happen to you, but I would just be aware of the chance for travel disruption, which could affect you in terms of delays or things like that. Like if you're traveling next week, if you have the ability to leave your travel itinerary kind of open and loose and give yourself a flexible schedule, I would absolutely do that. And I would just double check all of your confirmations and reservations and all of that, and just like reach out to the like airline, hotel, whoever you're staying with, whatever, just double check and make sure that everything really is in place before you leave. Okay. And then just travel safe, travel smart, right? Take all the normal common sense precautions that you might. Make sure that your batteries have enough charge if you need to communicate. Make sure that you have your name and contact information slapped on all your luggage, anything that you're traveling with, in case you lose it. Almost treat it as if it were Mercury retrograde. I think maybe would be a good set of precautions to take in that regard. So the 8th house, we were talking about Scorpio rising. 8th house also has to do with some more kind of occult themes around death, rebirth, and transformation. And so for some folks who have the 8th house active with this eclipse, you could experience that expression in that way. So the eclipse, the most intense part of the energy is the 2 weeks before and after. I have my calendar right here, so let me see if I can get you some dates pretty quickly. So I would say you really want to have your eye on the time frame from the 4th through the 16th. That's when it's going to be most intense, but that's not the only window. That's just the most intense window. But eclipses really can have an effect up to 60 days before and after when they're exact. So we could still be feeling the effects of this eclipse into March, potentially into when we have the March full moon. For Sagittarius rising, this is a 7th house full moon. So that has to do with partnership. It has to do with marriage and business, right? It has to do with relationships with other people in general. It has to do with what we reject about ourselves. And when we're talking about the descendant specifically, has to do with what we project onto other people, right? Especially the shadow self is what I believe Jung called it. So if you want to do shadow work, you can get digging around in the descendant and play with that. 7th house also has to do with open enemies and rivals. Okay. For Capricorn, this is a 6th house full moon. So that's work. It's health and diet. It's daily routines and schedules. It's your habits. It's employees and pets. Those things are all related to the 6th house as well. For Aquarius, this is a 5th house full moon for you. So creativity and children, right? Romance and true love, not marriage, right? That's partnership and Venus, which is 7th house, but love, because the 5th house is the natural house of Leo, right? Leo rules the heart. So this is affairs of the heart, true love. Also pleasurable activities, things that we just enjoy doing. Sports, risk-taking and gambling, those things are also governed by the 5th house. Pisces, for you, the final sign of the zodiac, this is going to be a 4th house full moon. So it'll have to do with home or family, potentially. Your parents, one or both of them, could have to do with real estate or your residence. Eclipses are notorious for changes of residence, relocation, things like that. So if you joined us late and we were already past your rising sign, if you don't know what the house this is falling in for you or the themes of the house, just let me know in the comments what your sidereal rising sign is and I'll recap that for you. And then what we'll do after this, after part 2, we're going to move on to part 3.